Hi everybody, it's Sarah Cray and I teach watercolor and sometimes gouache, and today we are doing our Harvest Moon project.
Or
There we have Keenan.
hello?
Working the cameras and being our noises. And we will be doing this project in 5 steps. So our very first step is we're going to put down the color on the background. Our second step is we're going to actually smooth out to try and get a very smooth transition of color. Our third step is we will paint our moon. Our fourth step is we will paint our trees. And our very last step is just any finishing details that we need. We are using a half sheet of paper, so I just cut my sheet in half and taped it using my favorite tape, which is Holbein soft tape. And I have 4 paint brushes, around 2, around 6, around 12, and a 1-inch wash. Please use what you have. Don't let the wrong size paintbrush stop you from making something. And we are actually using gouache today for this tutorial. And if you're not familiar with gouache, gouache is essentially if watercolor and acrylic had a baby. So you can add water to it, but it's opaque, which means you can layer it like you can acrylic, but it has gum arabic as its binder. So you can use water to kind of like water it down. It kind of still bleeds and blooms. It has a matte finish, chalky finish. It's just, I really love gouache. So I hope you guys have fun with it. If you don't have gouache, you can absolutely do this project in watercolor.
Sweet.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, we are using all 5 colors for our project today. So our very first color is ivory black. Our second color is magenta. Our primary magenta. Our third color is, let me make sure I have the right name, primary cyan. Our fourth color is primary yellow. And our last color is permanent white. Now, if you're looking for some colors to get started with whatever medium you have, using cyan, yellow, and magenta with black and white are an excellent way because you can mix so many colors using that. You can mix red using magenta and yellow. So I highly recommend magenta yellows and like a cyan blue for your first 3 colors in any medium because you can mix a lot from there. Okay?
Okay.
Let us do our oath and then we will get to painting. So our if you can raise your right hand. If you can repeat after me. I promise to be kind to myself.
I promise to be kind to myself.
I promise not to compare my work.
I promise not to compare my work.
And I promise to have fun.
And I promise to have fun.
Thank you. And before we get started in this project, this is the first project in our Sacred Shadows box, which is what we're using right now. And I wanted to share a little quote with you.
Oh, good.
It's on your welcome note. And it's from Molly and Adventuring Within on Instagram. I came across it. I thought it was really beautiful. I wanted to share. And just like the moon, you shall go through phases of light, of dark, and of everything in between. And though you may not always appear with the same brightness, you are always, always whole.
That's a good quote.
Isn't that nice?
I like that.
And I think it's just because, I think that resonated with me because sometimes when we're not showing up like our best selves or we're feeling insecure, sometimes we feel like we have to hide who we are to fit in, or all of these things that we essentially make up in our own head. We're always whole, even though we don't feel it, even though our brain is telling us something different, to be who we are and to embrace those aspects of ourselves that maybe we think are kind of weird or embarrassing or funky or not the traditional. That's what makes us who we are, which is beautiful. You know, we all have that aspect about ourselves. So I hope that with this box and with these projects, you recognize that maybe the shadowy parts of ourselves that we try and hide are actually what defines us, are actually the moments where we can see light and see who we are and recognize that that is us, and that's enough. Okay?
I like that a lot.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start, and on the step step-by-step sheet, the first step says to transfer your outline. What I mean by that is transfer a circle. So you're gonna grab any circle that you have. You can use a cup. I'm gonna use my tape. Essentially whatever size you want your moon to be, we're gonna trace that. I'm gonna do it a little off center because your subject should never be right in the middle.
What if it is? What happens?
It's just really hard to balance a composition when you start with something in the center. It makes it feel, I don't know. It just throws the eye off compositionally. So I always start with a little bit. You could do to the right, you could do to the left. You also don't want to make it too close to the edge. You'll notice that in some paintings, if your subject is too close to the edge, you feel uncomfortable. You're like, are you gonna fall out? Like,
can you sit up straight, please?
Can you just, So about there feels pretty good to me. And then I'm just gonna trace it. There's my moon.
Wow.
Now, if you're using watercolor for this, you're gonna want to avoid your moon completely. Because we're using gouache, what we're going to do is we're going to paint around our moon, but if we get a little bit of overlap, it's not the end of the world because we have gouache, which means we can paint over our color and the white will cover whatever we're painting. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because it's opaque, so we can layer it. So essentially you're gonna do a color transition, and the color that I'm looking for here is I want a little bit of purple. You see how that little hint of purple on that horizon?
Yeah, now I do.
Yeah, it goes like from purple to magenta to red to orange.
Oh.
So let's mix those colors.
There's always a color that I don't see until you point it out.
And then you're like, whoa.
Literally always. Unless it's a monochromatic painting, and then it's, you're like, plot twist, there's yellow in this monochromatic, this black painting. Like, what?
Okay, ooh, look at that purple.
Yeah, that's nice.
You get a really gorgeous purple with these colors. And actually, when I was making this project, I wasn't planning on putting purple in, and I just happened to like mix them, and then I'm like, oh, I gotta put that in the painting.
It's gotta be there.
It's so good.
Keenan will never see it.
And you can decide how purple you want it. So if you want it to be like really, really purple, you can add more blue. See how that's like, I would say more like a violet purple. And then if you add more of the magenta, that's where it starts to show like that pink purpley color. So it's up to you guys. I'm gonna do a little bit of both because I like just having options. And then I'm gonna grab some red. Okay. So I'm essentially gonna try and make a color transition on my palette mixing, so then I can just pull and go. I'm gonna do some fresh red, some without any purple in it. Or magenta, I'm sorry. I'm saying red, but it's magenta. So now I have my magenta, and I'm gonna add a little bit of yellow to turn it red.
Whoa.
And then I'm gonna do a lot of yellow to get an orange, which is kind of the color I'm going for at the bottom. So you see, I'll pull my palette over. We got the dark purple, purple, pink purple, red, orange, okay?
That's a good looking palette. Already ready-made.
Already ready-made.
Already ready-made.
And you guys can start at the top or the bottom, whatever's easier for you. I'm actually gonna start at the bottom. I have all that yellow on my brush and orange on my brush, so instead of rinsing it off and grabbing the purple, I'm just gonna paint with it, okay?
So it doesn't matter which...
Not really. I will say that sometimes it's easier, how do I say this? If there's yellow in your painting, which is traditionally like a lighter value just naturally, and it moves, let me think of how to say this effectively. Okay. If you're looking at my painting here, I would consider this a darker value and this a lighter value, even though color-wise, like hues-wise. So if I'm starting with yellow, I would want to start yellow and work my way up because if I start with purple and work my way down, purple is so strong that it can really muddy up the yellow. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Where if I start with yellow and orange and then transition that way, I feel like if you tend to like move that color a little bit more, it's okay because the purple will overtake it. We're trying to put purple into the yellow, we'll make it brown. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Smooth the yellow into the purple.
Yeah.
For safety.
Yeah.
And optimal non-muddy color.
Here we go. We're going.
Ooh, that was swift.
You gotta work quick. And I'm using my 12, but you can use whatever color you want. Now at this point, I'm gonna grab red. Now when you transition, you want to overlap the colors a little bit. Not all the way. See how I'm not taking it all the way down?
Yes. That's a fun orange color.
Isn't that good?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna grab more red. And this is where it gets hard because you gotta try to avoid your moon. And if it's being a little bit too rough, see how I'm getting some rough textures? You can always grab some water. Now remember, when you grab water with gouache, it thins out the paint a little bit, so it might not be as opaque. That's not a big deal. You just have to do a couple layers then. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, that transition's looking good.
And then what you can do, and I'm gonna kind of just do this now, but you can wait if you want, is you can take your 1-inch wash, and while it's damp, look at how smooth that makes it. Smooth that right out. I love using a 1-inch wash to smooth. Okay, now I'm gonna grab the more purpley red, and I'm just gonna keep going.
In your painting travels,
Yeah.
when painting with gouache versus watercolor, and you go to smooth the colors like you just did, have you noticed that it is smoother with gouache than it is with watercolor?
Is it smoother with gouache? I would say that it actually is easier to smooth out the gouache because it's a thicker paint in general and opaque naturally. Where sometimes when you're trying to smooth out and wash in watercolor, because it's so transparent, you can see the brush marks stop and stop.
Smooth.
Smooth.
Smooth. That's the word of the day.
Oh, smooth.
When you smooth out.
When I smooth out.
Yes, thank you.
It is easier with gouache.
Sorry, I had to correct you.
No, thank you. It's so embarrassing. Okay, and as you can see, I'm just adding a little bit more blue or purple as I work my way up.
In case you were wondering, I was Googling, why do wolves howl when it's a full moon?
Okay.
Because they do.
They do. We know this.
And it behooves of me to tell you...
They don't.
They do not.
The media misleads us again?
Again. So it says, we hate to burst your bubble, but it is a myth that wolves howl at the moon.
Wow.
Howling may be heard at night, but it is not a behavior directed at the moon. It is, however, used as a social rally call, a hail to hunt, or as a territorial expression.
Wow.
Yeah. So they're just always howling, full moon or not. They're out there hanging out and taking over.
Okay, Keenan, I'm glad you shared that, and now you know not to howl, like you did at the beginning of the tutorial and did already.
Well, I was claiming my territory of this tutorial. Or communicating with you that we're ready to record. I don't know. Maybe I'll just start howling just to communicate.
It's painting time, actually. When you hear a howl, it's time to paint. Stop what you're doing, grab your paints. Let's go.
The wolf pack of Let's Make Art.
That's right. Okay, so now I put in all my colors, and you can see that I just want you to pay attention to how smooth this is, and you can see where I haven't smoothed it out the top. So I'm gonna start smoothing it out, but you gotta be careful because we got a white moon that we gotta like work around. If you accidentally get some a little bit, that's okay.
Because gouache is opaque and you can
Because gouache is opaque and we will put we're gonna paint our moon. Okay, now at this point, you're like, okay, where do I have some hard edges where this transition is not seamless? Right here is a big one for me, and right here, okay? And this is where I would say that gouache is easier to smooth out because we can layer on top. So in this area, I feel like I need some red, some fresh red to kind of overlap and try and get a smoother transition of hue and value. And by red, I mean magenta. I'm sorry I keep saying red. It's magenta.
That's okay.
Thanks. And sometimes you have to bring the color up into it a little bit more and down into it a little bit more. But you see what I mean? How like bringing color down into a lighter value area, it always is like strong.
Oh yeah. That makes me think of watercolor when you try to get rid of a hard line.
Yeah.
And it just moves it to a different spot.
Yeah.
For me. I mean, it just literally just moves. It's like, oh, you don't want me here, I'll rearrange.
But now that we have gouache, I can try and just pick up yellow and try and smooth out that hard edge a little bit. Now I will say, depending on how many layers you do and how much you work your paper, it's possible that you might see your paper start to get a little bit of a texture. That's okay. You can actually see it in my reference photo. That happened to my painting, but it's not the end of the world. You just keep on going. But if you notice that your paper is really, really starting to degrade, you gotta stop. You gotta just be like, okay. I mean, all paper has its limitations, and you just kind of want to pay attention to how like far you're pushing it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. You're not trying to tear through your paper.
You don't want to tear through your paper, and sometimes you got to like back off of it a little bit, where you're like, okay, sorry.
Yeah. But you and paper are a team.
Yeah.
You need to communicate. Start howling at that paper.
There you go.
Or let the paper howl at you. I don't know.
We're not quite sure.
Yeah.
But there's howling involved.
There's
That's all we know. Okay, that's feeling pretty good. I feel like right here in this area, I'm not getting as smooth as I want. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna purposely overlap on my moon, probably more than I did on my reference to really, I felt like all the brush marks of me stopping and starting was kind of affecting it.
You know how when you say a word so many times that it sounds wrong? Mm-hmm. That's how I am with the word howl right now.
Too much howling happening?
Too much howling.
Okay, and then for me, this is feeling pretty good. I feel like I want to do a little bit more yellow here. I don't know why. My brain is just saying that seems like it got a little too dark too quick. So let's see if we can soften that up. So I'm gonna use just yellow.
Whoa.
And try and make that kind of just a smoother
Oh yeah, that's cool.
transition. That feels a little bit better. I feel like I need to do it on the other side. And I know this is a little bit longer than we tend to do color washes for, but I wanted this to be nice and smooth. And sometimes you have to do some finessing to make it nice and smooth. And I feel like I need like just the strongest hint of yellow here. Just right at the bottom. I'm gonna use just thick.
That looks cool.
Because that orange felt like it was really long. Yeah. Okay, I think I'm there. That feels pretty good.
Nice.
All right. Now what we are going to do is we are gonna let this totally dry. And I'm gonna actually rinse my waters and my brushes really well because we're gonna be using white and yellow. And so any color in our cup, like heavy color in our cup or color in our brushes will be picked up. So you wanna clean those fairly well. So I'm gonna use my little brush cleaner actually. What I like to do with this is I actually like to have my jar of, we call it shame water behind the scenes. It's our dirty water. Shame water, and then I have my little paint puck thing. So then I rinse all the yuckiness out of here, and then I essentially use this to clean, and that way I know my brushes are totally clean. You know what I mean? It's like easier to see. Okay, a word of caution, because I just did it, and I don't know if we're gonna show it, so I'm gonna tell you about it. I used a damp, clean brush to try and smooth out an area. Now this happens with watercolor too sometimes, but especially with gouache. Because I wasn't laying any color down, it lifted the color that I was trying to smooth out. Which means I had to blend even more to try and cover up the color that I accidentally lifted out. All of that is to say, when you go in with a wet brush, even if it's clean, it's possible when you're trying to smooth that you'll actually lift the color up. And that will create more of an inconsistency in your smooth wash. So what I like to do, instead of using a clean wet brush, use a clean dry brush to just smooth that out, and it won't pick up the color the same way as a wet brush will.
Cool.
Okay. And I actually have like a large mop brush that I always keep dry and use specifically just for smoothing out. Because it's like a makeup brush. It's like nice and big, and it just creates some really nice smooth washes.
You know what would be a really fun transition to do? Is if you had like a really miniature actual like floor mop brush. like some yarn or something attached to a brush. This is what I use to do a wash.
Yep. Love it. Okay, now I would like to acknowledge that if you see my step-by-step here in my tutorial, you can tell that I really did a good job of leaving this white, and I did not do as good of a job here. What that's going to translate to is us having to do quite a few layers of the white to get that white of that moon back before we paint the yellow, okay? It's not the end of the world. I don't mind showing you. I just want to acknowledge that if you were able to save the white of the paper, then you won't have to do as many layers on this, okay?
Got it. Kind of looks cool. Kind of looks like the moon in Dune.
Do you know what you could do too is you can almost create like clouds in front of it.
Yeah.
So it's just the little hint of a moon. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And like those pink dark clouds in front or something like that.
And you could do like the dry brush stroke over it.
Yeah. And you can see here my paper started to degrade a little bit from all the blending. Again, that happens. That can even happen with like this isn't 100% cotton paper. I think it's a great student grade paper and I like to use it. But for, I've even degraded some 100% cotton paper because I just worked it too much. Worked it. Okay.
Worked it.
We're gonna do a couple layers of just white. Now the hard thing is really going to be to make my moon actually the shape of it. So I might actually, let's just redraw it. So I can actually see.
It's a convenient sized white spot you put there that was inside the size of the tape.
I don't know what you're trying to say.
The tape didn't get on the white paint that you put down first.
Oh yeah.
That was neat. Thank you for your honesty.
Sorry.
I don't know what you're saying.
I don't know what you're trying to say right now. And you might be wondering, why aren't you just painting, like our moon is yellow in the painting, so why aren't you just painting it yellow right now if gouache is opaque?
That was gonna be my question.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, so the reason why I'm not is because even though gouache is opaque, when you paint on different colored surfaces, the color on top is going to be different. That's why you do underpaintings and things like that. So if I were to try and do yellow straight on this right now, I could probably get away with it, but it would have a muddiness to it because the color underneath it was like a little bit pink purple. Where if I want it to be a bright white moon, I need to start with the under part being white first and then layering on top of that. That will make my yellow be a bit more vibrant, okay?
Got it.
Now you can see, even though I'm painting white, it's picking up a little bit of that color underneath. So I'm getting like some pink strokes in there. It's not the end of the world, but you just want to be aware of that. Also, trying to paint a perfect circle is so hard.
Have you seen those videos of people with a piece of chalk and a chalkboard and they just draw a perfect circle by spinning their arm?
No.
It's insane.
That is insane.
I tried it. It's not easy.
Tried it. Turns out
Can't do it.
not everyone can do it. Actually, one of my art teachers, the very first art class I took when I was a senior in high school, he says that it's easier to get a circle using your arm than using your wrist. So when you're doing basic shapes, use your shoulder to move instead of your wrist. And it's easier to get like a good circle. How true is that? I don't know. But I trust him. He was great. Yeah, trying to get a not lumpy moon is not easy. I have found that it's easier to load your paintbrush with paint and do in the middle and kind of just let the bristles do the edges like this. Can they see that? Mm-hmm. Instead of trying to take my brush all the way to the edge. I feel like it's a smoother circle that way. Can you do the overhead for me, Keenan?
Yes, ma'am.
So I can see that circle. Okay, I think I just need to paint this side. And if we get a mostly circle, I'm happy with that. I feel like this edge kind of flattened out.
Kind of looks like the Death Star. A little divot on the top.
Sorry, I'm focusing.
Nice.
Okay, you know what? I'm gonna call that a win. My edge is mostly circular circle shape. And then I'm gonna dry this and I'm gonna do one more layer of white gouache before we add in the yellow because you can see here that it's pink in the middle. Mm-hmm. So grab your heat it craft tool. I can never remember the name of this dang thing. I always have to look at the side of it.
I was gonna say, luckily it's printed on the side.
I know. Or else I would just be calling it a blow dryer.
That's what I call it.
And they'll be like, how do you get those? And I'll be like, you know those mini ones in hotels? Just take it.
They have a wall mount.
Just grab that whole thing. There you go. That's the only way to get mini hair dryers.
We sourced them for years. Couldn't find them. We just started staying at Hilton's and we could call them.
Okay, but can we just talk about how like nice and smooth my background wash is?
I know. It
It looks
good.
pretty good. I mean, I know we had to like work it a bit, but it was worth it in the end. Okay.
Work it.
I'm still using my round 12. You can use whatever brush you want. I'm gonna just do one more layer. I'm not gonna focus on the edge as much because I really don't want to accidentally change the shape. I'm kind of just focusing in the middle where it's the most pink. And this is the beauty of gouache, my friends, what I'm doing right now. I know that some people really struggle with gouache, and I did too for a long time, but I just realized that what I was doing was the same thing that I was doing when I first tried watercolor, and that was expecting it to be something that it wasn't and being mad at it for not being the thing that it wasn't, even though it's different. So by that I mean I struggled with watercolor a lot because I started using it with the expectation that it's like oil and acrylic, and so when it didn't behave that way, I'm like, this is dumb. And also I'm bad at this, so no thank you. But it's because I wasn't utilizing it. I wasn't embracing it for what it is. And the same thing is with gouache. Sometimes we get frustrated because we're like this, and if we're used to watercolor, we're thinking, this isn't doing what I want it to do, therefore I don't like it and it is bad. But instead of approaching it that way, you think, okay, what are its qualities that are good, that can help me, and how can I utilize that when I go to my painting instead of, what is this thing that I don't even know what it is? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. It's like when you work with some artists and they never move their head out of the side cam.
That's the worst, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just, this thing is not doing what I wanted it to do.
Okay, I feel pretty good about how white that moon is, so I'm gonna dry this one more time and then we'll add the yellow. Okay, I'm gonna flip my palette around so you guys can see my yellow and my white. I'm gonna use my round 6 and a little bit of my round 2. And what I want you to remember with gouache is you want to make sure that you have paint on your brush when you're laying this down. If you have mostly water, you're going to be accidentally lifting that white up. So if you want to make sure you're layering for opaqueness, make sure you have a little bit more paint on your brush. I'm going to grab some yellow and I'm going to mix it with my white. And again, I'm really utilizing the paint as a paint color instead of water.
Have you looked up what a harvest moon is?
Yeah.
So you sort of know what it is?
Uh-huh.
So tell me if you found something different. Because what I've found is, and there's going to be one on September 22nd of this year, which is neat.
That
or there
is
was
neat.
one. There was one on September 22nd.
Nope. Yep. Yes.
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 Yep.
Yes, there was.
Says the most famous of all full moons lights up the sky, the harvest moon. It keeps the fields bright, allowing farmers to continue harvesting crops well into the night. That is crazy. That's fascinating.
I think it's the full moon at the autumn equinox.
Autumnal
Equinox.
Equinox.
And it was a sign traditionally for people to harvest then. Because of how bright it was, it let them harvest late into the day or night.
Night.
That's why there's a moon. Okay, so you can see here I'm taking yellow and white, and then I might grab a little bit, I have some orange left on my palette. I might bring that into the mix to get a warm kind of yellow.
This is cool. September's harvest moon is called the corn moon.
Ooh. We actually were driving home the other night and it was almost a full moon, and it was pink and it was beautiful because it was low, so it had like a little pink in it and it was gorgeous. Okay, so I just want to call attention to, as you're adding yellow, for me, because I'm a watercolorist, to help that color spread, my mind tells me to pick up more water. But with gouache, you don't want to do that. So you want to actually pick up more paint, and that's going to make your brush line a little bit smoother. And I'm going to try and go to the edge without adjusting the shape of my moon, which is a lot harder than it sounds. But you guys can do hard things, and so can I. So you can see here I have some different textures going on. That's okay. I'm not going to try and smooth that out. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use orange in my round 2 to get some of those like crater textures. Like if you look at the moon, it's not flat white. It actually has a lot of divots and textures and different values in it. So I'm going to use orange. If you need to mix orange, some more orange you can. And just kind of going along this left-hand curve, I'm going to put in some brush strokes, just some textures. I'm not being too meticulous about where. You can even use a little bit of your dry brush technique if you want, where you lay down a little bit of the color, let dry off your brush, and then kind of just smear it and spread it, just to see what kind of lines you get. If you really want to look at a moon while you're painting this, you absolutely can, because there are like some definite, have you ever seen a picture of the moon where it almost has like lines coming out of it? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't.
Well, that's the best I can describe it. So if you want to get a little bit more exact on the different textures as you're putting in this darker value, you can just look at a picture of a moon and kind of recreate those different textures happening here. And I feel like I need to, this white edge is just kind of a little bit too white. There we go. And let's say you want to, if you want to put some white back in, like maybe you painted a little bit too much and you're like, oh, that's not as like bright as I want it to be, put some white back in. This is the fun thing about gouache. Feels pretty good.
That's a cool looking moon.
The fun thing about moons is like, I don't know, sometimes it's easy to overthink them, but you just got to do like a round shape with a little bit different texture along one side and you're like, oh yeah, it's a moon. Okay, that feels good. Good job, you guys. Now we're going to start on our tree, which is our 4th step. Originally, when I painted this project, and you can see it in the step-by-steps, I was just going to have a tree branch coming along the side and have it be more thin. Which you can do. That would just mean that the moon is lower on the horizon if a tree branch is coming along its side. Does that make sense?
Yep.
But I wanted it to feel a little bit higher. I felt like it was difficult for our brains to make sense of a tree branch coming along the side because we're used to seeing the moon so high in the sky. So then I'm like, okay, I'll have it be above the tree line a little bit. I think that's easier for our brain to kind of comprehend. But I'm saying this in the way of, you can make a tree, like that happens for sure. So if you want it kind of coming out of its side, you can. You can even do like bird silhouettes, like maybe crow silhouettes or something like that. You got some options.
Sweet.
So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to start putting in my leaf textures, knowing that it's going to kind of come like this. So I'm kind of mentally in my mind saying, okay, my tree's going to come along this edge. It's going to be the most dense down here, and then as it gets to the perimeter of the trees, it's going to kind of thin out, and that's where we'll see some smaller textures, a little bit more details. But down here, it's so many leaves are overlapping because all the branches are overlapping that it's going to be pretty dense. So I'm going to grab my black, and I want this black to talk to the sky. I want the colors to relate to each other. So I'm going to mix some purple in with my black. I'm going to grab some of my magenta, some of my cyan. So I get a really, really dark purple. And I'm just going to start putting them in.
Cool.
So this is what I want you guys to kind of look out for as you're adding your trees. Our brain likes to do the same pattern over and over again with the same spacing and the same brush mark. So I'm going to challenge you, whatever brushes that you're using, and you can even, if you want to get really funky, you can use your 1-inch wash to switch it up. You can use different sizes, and then don't hold it the same. Switch it up. Like put it angled this way, put it angled to the side, angle it to the other side. This is all going to produce different marks, and that's what we're going after here. And then I want you to think about, okay, maybe there's a branch kind of coming up this way. So I'm going to have that kind of come up, and maybe it's kind of coming up this way. So we're basically just putting like the skeleton of our tree in. And then we'll take a smaller brush and go in and do more details. But even if you want to look at some trees and just be like, how do the leaves actually fall along the top, right? Because they're going up, but there's still gravity. Are they light enough that they still stick straight up? Is there a little bit of an angle to them? How do they actually, what are they doing in real life? That can be helpful to you guys as you're painting this. And then sometimes I like to just take and just smear it around. Trees are weird.
Trees are weird. Ooh. Cool technique.
Yeah, just getting some different textures, feel. Because sometimes what happens with trees is sometimes the leaves are so small and there's such a small amount of them that they don't feel as sturdy as a strong grouping of leaves. It feels like it is fuzzy, it is a lighter value, it is a softer hint. So sometimes just getting like gray values in here in between is a little bit more to what you would see. Okay, and now I'm going to take my round 2, which is the smallest brush that I have with me, and I can do more detail. And if you want to do like, oh, maybe there's a branch, and then here are some leaves, you can do that. And this is where you're going to start paying attention to the white spaces in between. Do they all look the same? Or is there too much? Is there too little? That kind of thing. The spaces in between the leaves sometimes inform us just as much as the actual leaves themselves.
Well, it's like rests in music.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And actually there are rests in compositions too, where sometimes our eye is just like going to one place that you try and provide. Oh, I dropped some water. Do you see that?
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Sometimes like there's a lot going on here, and I would say that this sky, it's active because of the color and it's there, but I would consider that a rest in our composition because it's not pulling our eye towards it, but it's somewhere for us to look at to not be so active over here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that is just as important in a painting and a composition as the subject itself, as in music, the resting spot, the breathing spot. That matters too. And again, play with your textures. Play with the angles of which you're putting down the brush marks. Are they all the same? How can you make them different? How can you mess it up?
Is it a tree? Is it a bush?
Is it Keenan?
Is it?
And if you want to, You can do like, if you want to do multiple colors in here, like let's grab some purple. And introduce some like purple to this tree silhouette. Sorry, I need more magenta in there. Because that can provide a little feeling, just a slight hint of like depth, just by introducing a different value and a different color. It doesn't have to be across everything.
That's cool.
And it's not, you might not totally be able to see it on this camera, but in person, if you're doing this, it does add just a little hint of color, and it just makes it feel, I think, a little bit more full, even if it's not, I don't know, totally correct. Okay, so I got a problem. I dropped water on my painting. And you might be like, what do I do?
Looks like Mars from this angle.
Add stars. There you go. You can totally add stars and turn that into a star, right?
Totally.
Or if you want to cover it up, you got to try and match the color around it. And I'm going to try and cover it up. And we're just going to see. And this is one of those things where you're just like, it's a gamble. I could be making it worse, or I could be fixing it. But this is how I would do it. And this happens when I'm painting all the time, where something happens that I didn't expect, and I think, okay, I can try and fix this, and it can make it worse, or it can make it better. But I resigned myself to the fact that any one of those options is possible, and that's okay. And the worst thing that can happen is I just have to start over, which I don't think is a terrible thing, because I'll be painting forever. So what's one day, you know?
True.
Okay. So if you want to try and like look at the color that's next to it, and then the color you mix, and be like, okay, yep, that feels pretty good. The hardest thing will be the level of opaqueness. Okay, so that made it a little bit darker. So what's gonna happen, let me rinse my brush. And this is me just problem solving right in front of it. I don't know how it's gonna turn out. What if I just work that area with the damp brush? Okay, that lifted out some color, so I'm gonna pick up some more. I want to be careful to avoid my moon.
This time.
This time. Yeah, because I've already painted it all. Okay, how's that looking? Okay, now it moved the edge here. Do you see that?
Yeah.
All right, so we just got to keep going. Keep trying to match the values. Keep trying to smooth it out. And I'm going to add a little bit stronger color here. To try and get these values to talk to one another.
This is a tricky balance.
It is. And so sometimes, funny enough, I've learned that this is true in business also. One solution always creates another problem. It's just a matter of time. You know what I mean? So you're like, yes, this will fix it. And then you're like, oh, actually that just moved it over there, you know? And that happens in art. That happens in life. And it's not that the original solution was bad or wrong. It's more just like things change, things shift, and You just got to keep trying, keep going, keep trying to make it better and try and solve the problems as they come. Kind of carefully working my way around the moon. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use just red to blend this line out. And at this point, if you're watching me, you might be like, you should have just left it. I probably should have. That's okay. It's going to happen.
Could it have been a cool star moon? Sure.
Yeah, it really could have. That honestly probably would have been the easier thing to do. Because now I got to try and work around. Okay, so that feels...
But we wouldn't have learned this valuable lesson.
Stop messing with it.
Which was to keep it as a moon. That transition looks cool.
It still is a little bit too light in value here. And it could also be that this is just wet. You know what I mean? As it dries, it's going to do something different. But I'm going to try and match the values as much as I can. And you can always go thicker too. That's the nice thing with gouache, I think, is like I could just lather my brush with a ton of paint and just do a really thick layer over it. Okay, now let's get some red. Better, we're almost there.
That looks awesome.
Now I'm trying to like kind of blend out this dark line here. I'm gonna rinse my brush as much as I can anyway.
Some deep color. I like that.
Okay, I think if I do yellow right here, we're about there. Well, isn't it so funny that this made this tutorial probably twice as long as it needed to be? That's okay.
Again, valuable lessons here.
And then I'm probably going to have to go back and do a little bit of the black on top of this new thing that I'm painting. Almost there. Okay. I'm going to do a yellow edge here because I went over my moon on accident. Okay. And over on this side, just a little. Okay. And then my black. So I accidentally smeared some of my leaves here, but I actually am okay with that. I'm gonna lean into that a little bit and just move my branch a little over to this side. And I had some smeary areas over here anyway, so I still think it works. Yep. All right. Well, there we go. We fixed that one little water drop.
Boom.
And I think too, when you're presented with a problem that you're like, oh shoot, how do I want to go about solving that? There's different ways that you can solve something. You can turn it into something else. You can ignore it completely. You can try and smooth it out. But I think seeing the amount of work that goes into it, it's easy then for you guys to decide, actually, I'm just gonna leave it. Or actually, yeah, I'm gonna add some stars. Or, you know, like, all of that is information that you guys can use. And whether it's me doing it in front of you that you can see, or you guys trying it out for yourself, that is all moving forward a lesson learned in any way, which you can then take and do something with or adjust.
Teach someone else.
Yeah. Should we untape it?
I want to see it untaped.
Okay, it's a little.
I mean, we could let it be, I guess.
Hold on.
This is an absolute dry.
This is an absolutely dry brush that I just picked up to see if I can just smooth out a couple brush strokes.
Cool.
But you see how gentler it is? A completely dry brush is so gentle on a painting compared to a damp or wet one. Okay. Kind of liked how much it overlapped on my reference photo, so I'm going to add a little bit more.
Simultaneously drying and painting.
I do
more.
that all the time, where I'm like dry, but also we're going to add a little bit more. There we go. I really like that overlap. Another thing compositionally that you guys can look out for is you want things to clearly overlap or give space. If I ended my tree line right next to my moon without overlapping, in our minds, it's harder for us to then fit those things in a three-dimensional space. So if I have my tree in front of my moon, then our brain goes, oh, okay, the moon is far away, the tree is in front. Or if they're separated from each other, we're like, great, here's the tree and here's the moon. But when they're right next to each other and the tree isn't overlapping, then we're like, wait a second, is this tree and this moon on the same plane? And then our mind is just like, how is that possible? So when you're doing compositions and paintings, pay attention to how things overlap with each other and don't have them just like meet on the same line or like, you know what I'm saying? You want it to be clear.
Yeah. Obvious.
Obvious. This tree is obviously in front of this moon, that kind of thing. Okay.
Oh yeah, because otherwise it might make it look like it's holding it up.
Yeah.
Like picking up the moon.
The same is true for photographs, actually. Like if I have, like, I don't know how to describe it more than what I just did, but.
It's like when people take a picture at the Leaning Tower of Pisa and they make it look like they're holding it.
Yes. Look at that clean line. Can you even deal?
No. I've tried to deal like with cards. Can't do it.
Can't do it, can't deal. And I love a good white edge.
Yeah, like stark.
Yeah.
Tony Stark contrast.
Who is that? Just kidding.
Are you?
No. All right.
Oh, looking good.
There is our harvest moon. Now I know that we had to do a lot of fiddling with this to get that nice smooth wash, but if you can do it that first time and not let water droplets land on your painting, then you're smooth sailing from there. Also, and this has happened to me many times in painting, when I originally thought, oh, I want to do a nice smooth sky, but then I just get a line that I can't blend out, then I'm like, all right, clouds it is. We're putting clouds in this painting. So let your painting adjust too. It's okay to relinquish some of the control and say, all right, what are you telling me here, painting? You want some clouds? Let's put some clouds in. I'm not going to fight you anymore. So that might sound a little crazy, a little woo-woo, but who doesn't want some woo-woo in their life?
I do.
Okay, so that is our Harvest Moon project. I hope you had fun. I hope that you share it. If you're on Instagram, you can tag us at Let's Go Make Art. You can check out the hashtags in our description. If you're on Facebook, you can join our watercolor Facebook group. That's called Let's Make Art Watercolor. Very large, but very supportive group. And I hope that as you paint this and as you go about your day, you realize that even though you might not feel totally whole, you might not be showing up as your best self, you are still whole. You are the moon. You know, and even though people might just see little slivers at a time, you are always, always whole. So we appreciate you taking the time to create with us. Thank you for being brave and trying something new. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.